Hello, and welcome back to Who Knew? In today's video, we're going to take a look at a handful of science fiction movies and see whether the science behind them could potentially become a reality. Let's begin with Jurassic Park. For all you uncultured swine out there who didn't know, the movie Jurassic Park is based on the 1990 novel of the same name by Michael Crichton. It tells the story of eccentric billionaire John Hammond, who uses genetic engineering to create a new kind of animal reserve, one the world has never seen before. His company InGen harvests dinosaur DNA preserved in fossilized mosquitoes in order to recreate a range of dinosaurs from the Mesozoic era. Hammond and his team believed that no matter how dangerous or out of place the dinosaurs would be in the modern world, they could fully control every element from fertilization. Due to the fossilized DNA being, well, fossilized, there were a number of damaged or missing genes which needed completing. To solve this, the geneticists combined the ancient DNA with that of modern-day frogs. This enabled them to put population controls into place, such as all the dinosaurs being deficient of a certain amino acid, and of course them all being female. Naturally, this was too good to be true, and evolution found a way.
Life, finds a way.
Anyone who's read the book or watched the movie will never forget the scene where the main characters discover the hatched eggshells in the park, confirming that the dinosaurs were in fact breeding. Now, the book and the film do differ on several aspects, but the main concept of genetically resurrecting dinosaurs and how that would transpire in the real world today is what made the book and the original film so fascinating. So with an entirely plausible premise, could Jurassic Park actually occur today? The answer is yes and kinda no. Now, unfortunately, this means we're not going to be seeing a Triceratops walking down the street or a Stegosaurus mowing your lawn like an episode of The Flintstones anytime soon. However, in the early 2000s, scientists were able to bring back an animal from extinction. It started back in the late 1990s when scientists discovered a Pyrenean ibex named Celia, the last of her kind. Unfortunately, Celia died several months later in a freak accident involving a tree falling on her. However, prior to this, scientists had taken some tissue samples with the hope of being able to save her species. Now, this is where things get interesting. Even if scientists were successful and were able to clone Celia, there's a glaring issue that they would need to face. To truly bring the species back, Celia would need a partner to do the dirty with. Not only that, but in order to successfully repopulate the species, they would need many different samples to ensure enough diversity at the genetic level. We all know what can happen when you have too much of the same thing. Here's looking at you, medieval Europe. At the time, technology to take Celia's DNA and modify it to genetically make a male was not available. That being said, against the odds, the scientist went ahead with the intention of cloning her. Out of hundreds of created embryos, only one was successfully carried to term, and in July of 2003, the Pyrenean ibex had the honour of being the first animal to become unextinct. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be, as the clone died within an hour of being born due to several physical defects. Therefore, the Pyrenean ibex also had the second honour of being the first and only species to become extinct twice. Now, as this was 17 years ago, you might think we're one step closer to bringing back those terrifying Tyrannosaurus. However, the main point here is that the previously mentioned scientists began the experiment of cloning Celia before she had died, and before the species actually went extinct, giving them access to viable tissue and fresh DNA. So, the million-dollar question is this: could we, like the opening to Jurassic Park suggests, use DNA extracted from mosquitoes preserved inside of ancient amber? The answer right now seems to be no. DNA breaks down over time, and even if we were able to find enough mosquitoes perfectly fossilized in amber, the chances we would find viable DNA is astronomically low. As of 2019, the oldest DNA that has been discovered is no older than 2 million years. Now, while that may seem old to us, the last dinosaur to have lived was during the Cretaceous period about 60 million years ago. Now, that isn't to say that things couldn't change. Science continues to advance at a staggering pace, and in all likelihood, at some point, this question will change from a can we do this to a should we. The dinosaurs were creatures of a very different period in Earth's history. Us mammals should be thankful for the catastrophic events that led to our dominance. So besides the obvious and terrifying reason this might be a bad idea, would it be considered humane to bring these creatures back into a world that would be completely alien to them? In a similar vein to Jurassic Park, Gattaca dabbles in the world of genetic engineering. A 1997 film set in the not-so-distant future where children are conceived through a program which uses genetic engineering to ensure the child receives the best traits from both parents. This could be simple physical traits, such as having brown hair or blue eyes, all the way to preventing certain genetic disorders. Now, at first this might not seem like a big deal, being born into a society of perfect, beautiful people, except herein lies the story. The main character Vincent was conceived the old-fashioned way, outside of the program. This leads to him being looked down upon and discriminated against his whole life for being inferior, even by his own family. In this society, although discrimination is technically illegal, those that were conceived naturally are known as invalids and are relegated to being second-class citizens. The entire story of Vincent is that he believes that he can be more than what is predestined for him and dreams of a career in space. With the help of a valid, he's able to pass the numerous blood and genetic tests which finally secure him a job with the Aerospace Corporation. Through hard work and merit, Vincent is able to follow his dream, but at the cost of hiding his true self, leading a life only available to him based on what society sees in a genetic test, rather than what they believe he is capable of. As Gattaca came out over 20 years ago, where are we in terms of genetically engineering humans today? Well, we're not there just yet. Currently, there is something known as PGT, pre-implementation genetic testing, which allows doctors to screen embryos for abnormal chromosomes and genetic disorders during IVF. For those not familiar, IVF is the procedure whereby an egg is fertilized in a lab and later re-implanted into a uterus. Due to the difficulties and variables involved with IVF, PGT testing seems like a great idea, maximizing the chances of an optimal embryo. Right now, a lot of people consider these screenings a medical necessity for the future health of their child. But where does the line start to blur? Perhaps when during these tests, the parents start to become curious about eye color. What about gender? When do we go from having it be a medical necessity to wanting certain traits, characteristics, or attributes? Unfortunately, we may be closer to this one than some might like. In 2019, 3 scientists in China were sentenced to several years in prison for performing an illegal experiment whereby they implanted genetically altered embryos into a woman. These embryos were modified with the intent of being resistant to the HIV virus. We don't have time to go down an ethical rabbit hole here, but the key takeaway for humanity is this, that we're knocking at a potentially dangerous and unethical door that once opened cannot be closed. For now though, we invalids can rest easy knowing that there won't be any Instagrammably perfect people appearing on the streets or pushing us out of our jobs anytime soon. Lastly, we have the 2015 film based on Andy Weir's novel The Martian that tells the story of Mark Watney, an astronaut who is left stranded on Mars in the year 2035. During a severe dust storm, the team is forced to make a hasty evacuation from the Red Planet. Believing Mark has perished due to an accident during their escape, they set off home without him. We get to watch as Mark does everything in his power to survive, reconnect with Earth, and generally science the out of his situation in order to stay alive long enough to meet the next Mars mission in 4 years' time.
Science the out of this.
Between dealing with the loneliness of space, lack of food, and living in a habitat that is only meant to last for 30 days, we are shown the ups and downs that our protagonist goes through as the sole human occupant on a foreign planet. He has his triumphs, such as putting his botany skills to the test, creating a garden to grow more food, as well as uncovering an old Mars probe and using it to establish communications with NASA. But he also has his lows, the feeling of loss when his food supply is destroyed due to a malfunction in airlock, and the devastation of knowing his supply run from NASA blows up during takeoff. Now for those of you who haven't seen the film, spoilers ahead. Mark is rescued by his team, who choose to return to the Red Planet with a resupply run courtesy of the Chinese government instead of returning to Earth as planned. Mark, having been rescued, had managed to last an incredible 560 days on Mars and later became a survival instructor for NASA's future astronauts. Dancing around the ethical dilemma of risking copious amounts of time, money, energy, and resources to rescue just one man, we're going to take a brief look at the science behind The Martian. Would it be possible in just 15 years for humans to step foot on Mars? If so, what would that look like? How could it be accomplished? And finally, would it be possible for someone to survive there long term? This is likely the most optimistic and positive of the 3 movies we're covering today, not least because we actually have a roadmap set out by several countries and companies for reaching our celestial neighbour. NASA has tentatively set 2030 as a target date, while SpaceX is gunning for a much more ambitious 2024. Elon Musk has been quoted as saying that he would like to die on Mars, just not on impact. Visiting Mars isn't a new idea though. As early as 1947, aerospace engineer and lead developer of the V-2 rockets during World War II, Wernher von Braun, talked of man visiting the Red Planet. These ideas continued through the Cold War, culminating in a number of probe missions both from the United States and the USSR. Astonishingly, the first photograph captured on the Martian surface was taken by NASA's Viking 1 lander on July 20th, 1976, only a year prior to the Star Wars movie hitting the big screen. More recently though, NASA has launched the Perseverance rover on July 30th, 2020, scheduled to touch down on February 18th, 2021. but also has a planned mission where they aim to bring back samples of the Martian surface. Back to our questions though. Could we colonize Mars? Well, yes, but not without its challenges. Let's begin with getting there. We immediately hit our first obstacle in that both our orbits only line up for a short period every 2 years. Even then, we'd need to build a craft that can traverse 35.8 million miles through space while supporting astronauts for up to 9 months. Still, this is all plausible, even with our current technological capabilities. As for surviving on the surface, well, that's where things get a little trickier. At first glance, you might think Mars looks pretty promising. Polar ice, recognizable terrain, gravity, and even a day length similar to our own. As you can probably guess by now, things aren't that black and white. Here's a quick list of problems we would need to solve. Solar radiation, barely any atmosphere, low gravity, toxic soil, freezing temperatures, not to mention the psychological stress of being with the same people and performing the same tasks just to survive day in and day out. There's a lot to go wrong, and with Earth being so far away, rescue really isn't an option. Again, these are all problems we could potentially solve with the technology we have right now. Here's a few solutions to get us started. Due to Mars's lack of dense atmosphere and a weak ionosphere, much more radiation from space reaches the surface. To protect ourselves, we would likely have to build our habitats underground. This wouldn't be 100% perfect, but would prolong the time our adventurers could spend on the planet before they receive too much radiation. Powering the habitat would be another big hurdle. At first, you might think solar power would be the ideal solution, but unfortunately, even on a good day, Mars still only receives approximately 14% the solar energy of Earth. That's before you factor in the frequent and often planet-wide dust storms that block out much of the light for days or even weeks at a time. For anyone living in the Pacific Northwest right now, during the current wildfires, it's easy to look outside and see what we mean. Perhaps we could use wind power. Well, not really. Although wind speeds can reach up to 60 miles an hour on Mars, due to the low atmosphere, this isn't the same as back on Earth. You'd likely have trouble flying a kite there even on the stormiest of days. In fact, herein lies the biggest plot hole in The Martian. The dust storm that acts as the catalyst just wouldn't have been as big of a deal as they made it out to be. Worst case, they would have just had to clean off their solar panels. In the end, the best solution to power would be nuclear. We could bring a small reactor from Earth which could easily power missions for a good few years. Finally, let's look at food. Theoretically, Mark could grow potatoes the way he does in the movie. The reality though is a little bit different. Mars' soil is extremely alkaline, and so before we could even start planting our poop potatoes, we'd need to decontaminate it. This would take a while and use up a lot of energy and resources. The best solution would be to use an aquaponics system to breed both fish and plants together. Not only would this be easier, but it would also provide a much more varied diet for our planetary pioneers. So even with all of these hurdles, it's extremely likely that within the lifetimes of many of us alive today, we will see humans become an interplanetary species. Not only would this be infinitely cool and be the moon landing of our generation, but from a scientific and species perspective, we will have taken a huge step in preserving the human race, and possibly life in the universe. After all, until we colonize other worlds, we don't have a plan B. At the end of the day, we humans are incredible creatures when we apply our minds to a task. Throughout history, we've repeatedly achieved and then surpassed the crazy predictions of science fiction writers. Because of that, it's hard to predict how the future will look. As the saying goes, with discoveries, we tend to overestimate technology's impact in the short term and underestimate it in the long term. For better or worse, on a long enough timeline, it's likely we'll see a lot more than just the topics covered today become a reality. With that being said, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Personally, I love talking about space exploration, so if you can think of any topics related to that, comment them down below and perhaps we can put together a video on those. If you like this one though, smash that button below and subscribe for our next video. Until next time, thanks for watching. And often planet-wide dust storms that block out much of... Sorry, go back, my belly was grumbling.